Hi, Siobhan, we can start now.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Siobhan Thompson, CEO of WoSA South Africa, and a warm welcome to you all as we kick off the first of the WoSA South Africa Insider sessions brought to you by WesGrow. And the topic we're going to be exploring today is how to future-proof, and that will be presented by Richard Siddle from the buyer. So we hope that you enjoy our session today and join us again tomorrow and Thursday for the next ones. But before we start off, I'd just like to share a new launched portal that we've put up to help access exports by South African exporters. So just to give you a little bit more information about this, the Cape Wine Export Network is an outcome of collective response to the pandemic. With travel bans and the rise of virtual meetings and missions, and also the focus on digital platforms, the South African wine industry was actually provided with the best opportunity to create a digital platform. And this was to help expose, as I mentioned, importers and exporters to the South African wines. The platform's benefits are, it's the only business-to-business digital marketplace dedicated to South African wines. The concept and the platform has been tested with importers around the world to ensure its viability as well as its usability. And this is constantly evolving as we see better ways to do things. It also has a technical team that will support producers to load their brands. And it also has quite a strong marketing focus. So WoSA South Africa, as well as WesGrow and other entities have been helping to push it and market it around the world to get buy into the platform. So just to end off, it is both endorsed by WoSA and with WesGrow. And if you want to find out more about it, go onto the WoSA South Africa website, which is www.wosa.co.za, and go under the How to Export tab. So I'll leave it there. Just to kick off with, I'll hand over to Richard. Richard, thank you very much for chairing this session. And I'm sure that the audience will enjoy the discussion that is going to take place.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Siobhan. And thank you. And thanks for having me as part of this. Sad not to be able to come to South Africa this year, but I guess this is the nearest I'm going to get to it. So it's great to be involved. Well done, I think, also to WoSA for these sessions this week. So obviously there are the two sessions tomorrow and on Thursday as well, with Madeline and Jamie, I think, are hosting those. Obviously there's been a big focus on how COVID has hit countries all over the world, be they the markets that wines are sold in or the markets that the wines are actually being made in. And obviously South Africa, with it's probably arguably been the most affected in terms of the lockdowns and the impact that COVID has had just purely on production and distribution and the selling of wine. So which I think makes these sessions particularly pertinent this week. So really great to have a great panel of different kinds of producers with us this morning to share their insights. So just at random going around, we've got Greg Guy from, he's the International Director from DGB. We've got Corlia Fourie, who's the Head of Wine and Viticulture at Bosman Wines. Andrea Molyneux, who's the winemaker at Molyneux and Lou Family Wines, and Paul Kluver, who's the managing director of Paul Kluver Wines. So welcome to you all. We're obviously over the next sort of hour going to go into looking at the kind of the future, obviously, of South African wine. But I guess before we kind of go into much detail, could I just ask you, just perhaps in a minute, just to sort of quickly give a top of your own wineries, really, and your own businesses, just so that people watching can get an idea of the kind of business that you run. So, be you boutique or medium size, large size, and just to get a sense of the kind of wines that you make. So Greg, I'll start with you, so might as well come to you first. So Greg, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Richard. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it might be to you, wherever you are in the world. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks to everybody for helping put this together. Yeah, Greg Guy, looking after the international business of DGB. DGB is one of the largest producers and exporters of wine out of South Africa, focusing primarily on premium branded product. We're not in the bulk business at all. And shipping product in glass. We believe that building premium South Africa is critical to get us to the next stage in our development as an industry. And that's what we focus on. Brands including Boschendal, Bellingham, Douglas Green, Franschhoek, Brampton. There are too many to mention really, but basically premium branded South African product is where we focus.
Yeah, and you have a strong focus on brands, both wines and spirits, don't you, in terms of your...
Not on the export side, Richard. We do have a spirit business locally in South Africa, and we export to Africa, but primarily, export-wise and production, wine is our core game. It's 80% of our business.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Collier, could I come to you? You want to give us the your elevator pitch on Bosman?
Yes, so Bosman Family Vineyards is an 8th generation family wine business. It's also a multiple ownership model where the workers on the farm also has a stake in our business. So inclusion there. Our grapes come from Yimmel and Aarde Valley and also Wellington. And in terms of size, some 5,000 tons that we harvest every year.
Brilliant. Okay, and I think we'll obviously come back to that that ownership model a little bit later on when we talk about perhaps some of South Africa's USPs. And Andrea, do you want to talk us through all about Molyneux?
Okay, so I'm Andrea Molyneux, so co-owner and winemaker for Molyneux and Liu family wines. Two more boutique-sized wineries, but we do export to 35 countries and focusing on what we personally think South Africa does best, so focusing on Chenin Blanc, Syrah, and some of the oldest vines in South Africa. We have been South Africa's Winery of the Year 4 times, so we're really trying to aim high, but at the same time, anything that we have done well, we feel that it's lifting up South Africa as well, because when we're overseas and marketing ourselves, we're marketing all of South Africa and the wines that are coming out of the country.
Brilliant. Okay. And can I also say, as well as being a world acclaimed winemaker, you're also a wonderful bowler. Because I mean, when I was playing cricket as part of the press team in the Last Cape Wine, you bowled me out fair and square. So there you go. I'm always very scared when I see your face.
It's my one small claim to fame outside of winemaking.
No, don't worry about it. I'm still haunted to this day. Anyway, so Paul from Paul Kluwer, do you want to talk us through your winery?
Thanks, Richard. I must admit it's impressive to have an American bowl out an Englishman. That's fantastic. Paul Kluwer, part of also a family business. We are 4th generation farmers, should I say, firstly and foremostly. We've only been in the wine business, making wine on the estate for 23 vintages now. But planted in the mid-80s in cool climate Elgin. So my father pioneered the first commercial grapes. We started the first winery in the area, and we have a particular focus on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. And like Andrea, we also market right over the world and directly from the winery itself.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks for that. I mean, I think before we sort of go into more of the bigger issues, there's obviously, I mentioned at the beginning, South Africa's had they've been right in the storm of COVID in terms of your national lockdowns there. Could you perhaps just give us an update on where South Africa actually is now in terms of dealing with COVID really, and on what the situation is locally and I mean, we read and heard a lot about the impact it's had, but could perhaps you just give an indication on what the situation on the ground is there now, and how the industry is coping, recovering, dealing with what's happened over the last 6 months? I don't know who wants to tackle that one.
Sure, I'll go, Richard. I mean, firstly and foremostly, I mean, we've lost pretty much 3 months worth of sales in South Africa. We've had an alcohol ban, which I think has been more severe than most other countries. With regards to COVID specifically, South Africa is on a level 1 restriction. No alcohol sales are permitted on a Saturday and a Sunday, for example. We've had our first wave as opposed to Europe going into their second wave. We're hoping that we can avoid the type of second wave that you are going through right now. I think economically, which is probably having the biggest impact on the wine industry, is that the economy has been severely impacted, and that influences buying power within South Africa, and the fact that we are not trading at full capacity. Combine that with the fact that in the Western Cape, our tourism numbers are significantly down. So where traditionally right about now, you will have tourists flocking to South Africa, trying to avoid the horrible winters of Europe. The reality is that if you look at all the major five-star hotels in the Western Cape, ranging from the Cape Grace, Mount Nelson, One and Only, they're all closed. There's not a single person right there at the moment, which means the impact on buying power. And if you consider that the average tourist from Europe spends about 5 times more than the average South African tourist, and that's having an impact. I think that will only recover once we see tourism coming back fully.
Right. Very good. Greg, would you want to pick up on how you're seeing the impact of COVID and what impact it's having perhaps in medium long term?
Yeah, I think sort of Paul hit everything spot on there. Just, our economy was in trouble before coronavirus hit. If you think about it, we've got high levels of unemployment, we've got a dwindling middle class, lower levels of disposable income. So it has been a tough place to do business, all of last year and before. We then got whacked with the virus, which just affected things even more so. We've seen it's very difficult to do business and predict a trend at the moment because, immediately after a lockdown, there was massive buy-ins, so pantry filling, and then it dwindles off as the money sort of dries up. All the banks and finance houses here gave payment holidays, so people were living on borrowed credit more so than even normal, thinking, oh, this is not so bad. I've actually got cash. That's now dried up. And I think we're starting to see these results coming through. And I think November, December will be key in terms of what are our levels of recovery. I think we've all been forced to do things differently. I see one of the questions already coming up about online, and we've all sort of, if we weren't in the online sphere, we've now gone further into that. And that, I think, will fundamentally change the landscape going forward in how we do business. If you look at, US businesses in particular, they focus on the online channel a lot more than we have done in South Africa. And I think that will help going forward. But certainly, it is a tough place to do business right now.
Do you think there's been a bit of realignment in terms of having to focus where you can on your domestic sales as well during this time, as well as looking at exports?
I think so. I mean, obviously, speaking for DGB, we rely on both. I think it's critical to have a footprint in your home market as well as being globally represented. Part of the problem for our brands is that South African brands is that we're only found abroad. If you look at the biggest South African brands in the UK, America, Germany, all the big markets, a South African wouldn't be able to find that brand on a supermarket shelf in their own country. So one of the problems, that's one of our problems. I know it wasn't the question, but one of the issues is that we haven't got a strong local simultaneous export market. So domestically, there's been price pressure, and the same around the world. Everybody's trying to buy slightly cheaper, which is not great for our ambitions of raising our pricing.
Yeah. Cordelia, can I come to you in terms of your observations in terms of how COVID is impacting the industry and yourselves?
Maybe I should start with saying that as a primary producer and also as an employee of 500 permanent workers, our first crisis was making sure that everybody was safe and that we had systems in place, making sure that we could commence with work as usual or in a new usual order. For 2 weeks, there was absolutely nothing going on here on the farm. Luckily, we were able to get all of our grapes into the cellar. So we were finished with our production cycle, which was absolutely amazing. I'm very happy that we got to that point. But yes, I think it was all about people. It was about realigning, about making sure that we knew what was lying ahead. But yes, other than that, we have found that this year has been really interesting and quite difficult in terms of just a normal planning of everything. The normal flow of orders and knowing what to expect has been put on its head. But I think the wonderful thing about this time has been just tapping into resilience and tapping into what we used to doing in agriculture, right? Is looking at what's going on around you and trying to find ways of incorporating it into a new normal.
Brilliant. Okay. And Andrea, I mean, I know you have a very strong export market, don't you, with your very prestigious wines. I mean, what's it been like for you, just in terms of being able to get wines out to your core export markets? And
well, we do sell 50% actually domestically. As we've grown over the years, growing the domestic market has been very important, and so we have been in a growth phase domestically, and that was very important to keep that balanced. And as Corlia said, getting the systems in place for maintaining employee well-being, not just in terms of business and employment well-being, but also to make sure that everyone is healthy and safe, was really important in the wine industry. And luckily, wineries tend to be quite hygienic in general, and we tend to have a lot of space. We don't work in small confined environments typically, and for the vineyard work, it's obviously outside. So that was really good that we could go about our work safely and then reassure our customers then, therefore, so both domestically and internationally. I don't think that anyone would want to buy a product to know that it was that people were compromised in the making of it. So that was very important for us that we expressed that. But then when it came to exports, I mean, the exports really did, the people buying in wines from South Africa really did help to save SA wines. I mean, you see the hashtag above Greg's image there, the hashtag Save SA Wines, that I think Erica Taylor was the one who came up with that concept. And it was incredible to see this outpouring of support from abroad to save what was happening domestically. So, everything from getting letters written to the government from everyone from, Jancis Robinson to our top importers, other journalists, retailers that focused on South African wines abroad. It was their well-being as well. And when it came then to seeing that reflect domestically, what we realized was that people started to drink a broader range of South African wines as well, or maybe they knew about South African wines, both internationally, and domestically, but it got them to really think about it when making those choices. So it's actually amazing the outpouring from international to help both domestic and international sales.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm based in the UK, and there was a very natural and organic kind of like desire to try and help South Africa as much as we could. And I think not just from the trade, but also from the retailers and consumers as well, which I guess must be some sort of reassurance in terms of like South Africa's profile and image outside of South Africa, I suppose, in terms of like wanting to support. I mean, can we just perhaps just sort of drill into a little bit about how the distribution, the exports have now gone to? Because I know you went through a phase when you couldn't export. I mean, when we're now sort of mid-November virtually, I mean, looking back on 2020, I mean, is there an indication on how bad or how low or what impact it's actually had on your overall exports? I mean, going back to you, Paul, do you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, if I have to think of the export market, so we were banned for 5 weeks where we couldn't export, and that impact, while it was uncomfortable, I think the longer term negative impact around COVID and exports were actually the fact that the effectiveness of our ports dropped dramatically, and priority. Thank goodness we were in apples, but priority were given to fresh produce after that, which made it incredibly hard, especially if you had certain deadlines to meet with regards to exports to supermarkets, etc., etc. So I think if you in a lower volume product, so for example, I'm sure Andrea had less of a problem maybe than DGB, and I'm really projecting here, but if you have a product which which doesn't ship by the container every month, then the impact on you would have been lower than a wine producer that's shipping to meet supermarket demands. And I think that's where the real problem came in. So I would say for us, Paul Kluwer Wines, the impact on exports was significantly less. But I can definitely see that there were tremendous impact on other growers.
Yeah, Greg, I mean, obviously you picked up on it. Do you want to talk us through how your overall pictures look for DGB in 2020?
Yeah, fortunately, touch wood, it's been okay. I mean, Paul's right. There were issues with the harbour, but an exceptionally well-run logistics department that we have, and they managed to secure bookings for us. And we didn't really miss too many shipments, actually. We had one of the challenges facing us, not so much us, but some of our competitors, were in the monopoly markets in Sweden, Norway, and also in Canada, where unfortunately, you're judged on your performance and quotas. And when you don't ship for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, you haven't got an understanding buyer. Well, you have an understanding buyer, but you have a system that can't be bent or buckled. And that can penalize you in the long term. And I know there are instances of certain people losing their listings or being downgraded, which is not great. And that was one of the biggest sort of casualties of the pandemic. But yeah, we've been okay. Still tough. I mean, a bit worried, I guess, now about the second wave in the Northern Hemisphere. What will that mean to our exports going forward? And as I said earlier, in terms of the local market, it's been a very much up and down year. So stock, then oversupply, then undersupply, then oversupply. So we just need to get back to a normal trend line, and that's going to take a while, I think.
Yeah, well, that's just one of the questions that just come through, actually, is what impact that might have on the second wave that's happening in Europe now in terms of, perhaps Andrea and Khalil, I mean, you in terms of, I suppose the market with exports always works both ways. It's kind of what you also can do as producers to help your customers in the countries you work in terms of supporting them. I mean, obviously not being able to travel and do your normal wine tastings and dinners and stuff. What kind of steps have you done more, do you think, to sort of try and help your customers? Khalil, do you want to?
Yes, and here I think I would love to give hats off to Andrea, for instance. I really watched them going onto Zoom and doing all of those tasting, a tremendous effort. And I think most of us followed suit, and we became so much closer to our end client. I'm going to be honest, I had a call from a client in the UK asking if I would do a buyer's own brand, just pop into a casual tasting and just say something about the wine. It was wonderful for the first time, actually getting even that close to somebody on the other side of a retail shelf. Obviously, in terms of our branded wines, connecting with our agents, making sure that where possible, we connected with their clients as well, just to keep the contact and to keep the enthusiasm, and also to keep South Africa front of mind.
Yeah, Andrew, have you been living in Zoom and doing multiple Zoom tastings, I guess, over the last few months?
Yeah, the negatives being turned into a positive is, I think, something that a lot of people are seeing during this time. And this has forced everybody to zoom forward 20 years into the future. I mean, the idea of literally my head being carried around on someone's iPad from retailer to retailer and doing these virtual in-store tastings in America at 2 o'clock in the morning here, we never thought even a year ago that would be something that we were doing and would be successful. I do think, that there's nothing like the person-to-person contact and smelling and tasting and, just seeing body language and tasting food with people. There will never be that replacement. But I think that in general, people have been so positive about the fact that we have these resources to be able to still share our story. And if the wine can still get to them and you can still speak to them face to face in a digital format, I think that everyone is happy that we do have the ability to do this right now. But yes, I saw a few people in person the other day that I've probably done 20 Zoom meetings with this year. And it was weird. We kind of paused for a second and, you forget that you actually haven't seen some of these people face to face. But yeah, I mean, the way people are utilizing technology to make sales when we cannot travel still viable and the story's still getting out there. I think this is something we're going to be telling our grandchildren about eventually. It's a tremendously strange but exciting time in that way.
Yeah, and I guess also a country like South Africa that has so many amazing stories and great winemakers and different regions, and sometimes until you actually go to the country do you kind of really appreciate all that. Having that opportunity now for everybody to talk to the world. I mean, we've got nearly 200 people here today from around the world watching our debate, which normally would all have to come to Cape Wine to take part in this kind of conversation. So it's so in terms of where we go from here with this, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen in the next sort of few months with vaccines and stuff. I mean, do you know or have an indication on when you might be able to travel again and be able to start getting back to normal, or is that in terms of your travel windows?
For me personally, I think that it's going to look. We have harvest coming up in around the corner in a couple months. We're all going to be harvesting, and we don't typically travel in that time anyway. It would be amazing if after harvest in March, April of next year, if we could start traveling again. But I think that we're well suited to ride it out in the current format. South Africa hasn't had even the beginning of a second wave yet. The rest of the world is having a second wave. Vaccines on the horizon. So it is looking a little bit sunnier, but there's still so many unknowns. But I would definitely love to get out there and keep telling the story about South Africa, and even better, have people come here. I mean, look at the view on the screen behind Greg. It's just, South Africa is gorgeous. And when you taste the wine in the country and on the ground where that wine comes from, it has a completely different experience and meaning to the consumer. So it's not just about us getting out and telling the story. It's about getting people back to South Africa as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's get into the bones of it all now, really, and look at where this whole topic is about sort of future-proofing South Africa. And I guess in order to do that, we need to understand what the current situation is to actually move forward from. So perhaps sort of going back towards before COVID happened. I mean, if you were doing a school report for South Africa wine, what would you say it's doing well, and what would you think it needs to be doing better? If you perhaps give us a quick thought on where South Africa was going into COVID. So, Corlia, perhaps I'll have to start with you from a winemaking point of view. I mean, do you want to give us your school report on South Africa?
No, pre-COVID, it seems a very long time ago, but I think the important thing was that the appeal of South African wines and the appreciation for our wines was definitely at an all-time high. I have this feeling that after the drought that we experienced, it wasn't even just the appreciation, but also almost a more sustainable place in which we found our wine businesses in, being able to ask more relevant prices for our product. So that was basically the point where COVID started, and I think this is what we're going to talk about for a long time to come. And how to sustain that and how to build on that, even although things are quite different than in that time. Yeah,
and in terms of the perhaps Paul, you mentioned earlier about the fact that the impact of COVID has been tough, but not necessarily game changing for yourself. I mean, do you see where you are in terms of what image of South Africa was projecting before COVID? What would you pick up as being the real USPs of South Africa?
Yeah, I would say the impact of COVID has been game changing, and I do think we need to recognize that. Whether it's been a game ending scenario for us, luckily not. I think that one of South Africa's absolute strengths up until now has been its incredible quality it's producing. And I want to say that because I'm with a caveat of incredible quality at an incredible value. And I'm saying the last one I want to say in inverted commas, because at some point we need to break away from this value game and just say, guys, we make incredible wines. We never think of American wines being incredible value for money because they're $100 or $200 a bottle. But South Africa produces amazing wines at fantastic prices. And I mean, Andrea's just said it. We have produced some of the top wines in the world, and we're doing it on a consistent basis. And that is why you're seeing more and more people saying the country to look out for is South Africa. And I think that's what's going to stand us in good stead going forward. The challenge that remains now is, are we competitive in the right channels to our consumers? So Greg briefly mentioned it. Online sales, I think, is critically important. Retail sales is going to be critically important, especially in Europe in the next couple of months. We know that on consumption is dead. It's going to be dead for the next 6 months, at least, before people. No one's going out in London and eating in a restaurant. So if your brand's focused on trade, I think you're going to have to make a step change and then move towards how do you reach to your consumer on a direct consumer basis or on a retail basis.
Yeah. Greg, do you want to pick up on where you see South Africa in terms of going into COVID, where it is now, and whether or not it's changed its position in terms of what its future can look like?
Yeah, so you asked for the school report card. I'd probably give it if I was a strict teacher, a C, maybe a B+. I think our average price points are still too low. I mean, you can call it a legacy of years of starting exporting after apartheid and getting bullied by bigger retailers, and we've never really recovered from that. But we have had good progress in the past few years. The international journals are really writing about South African wines. Canoncop getting the 100 points of breaking the barrier. There's been others subsequently, and it just starts people talking, and it lifts the whole ship about South Africa. Paul's 100% right on that value thing. It's not a good thing to be quoted at the end of every sentence, but we still do it, and we probably have to. We've got to get these retailers to stop looking at South Africa as the destination for buyer's own brand, cheapest wine on shelf type stuff. We don't want to be in that game. It's going to be challenging in the next few months because the second wave is forcing everybody, consumers around the world are tightening their belts, buying cheaper wines. There's an excess of wine in the Northern Hemisphere. We've got an excess of bulk. And how do we sort of, tell these buyers politely that we don't want to be supplying them cheap wine at a rock bottom price? I think one of the ways out of it is by engaging with our primary growers in the market and making sure we've got the correct vines planted. It starts there. We don't have enough Chardonnay, enough Cabernet, enough Merlot, enough Sauvignon Blanc, the varietals that the people want. We haven't got enough of that planted. I'm a big advocate of Chenin and Pinatar. Don't get me wrong on that front. I think those do offer massive opportunities for us. And we have seen, those are the two easiest wines to list. But your traditional markets, big markets in the US and even China, they want cabs, they want Merlots, and we don't have enough of it. And that, I think, is one of the ways that we can future-proof our industry is by engaging with the growers to make sure we've got the right stuff planted.
And does that also mean, obviously, with the 2021 harvest, in terms of I know we talked earlier about it's very hard to make predictions at the moment and forecast. Will that have an impact, you think, on the level of production that needs to be in the 21 harvest in order to keep in mind with what the global demand might be for some of these premium wines?
Yes, I do think. I think there's definitely. It's the growers have been discussing it for the past few months. It's not new, and everybody's adjusting their demand forecast accordingly, and whether they're not picking or whatever they're doing, but it is going to, and it's challenge. I get questioned all the time by our wine team, what is the forecast? And it's difficult because, I asked the buyer in the market, and he said, well, I'm not sure what my consumers are doing. So it's forecasting is a near impossible science right now. Yeah. So I don't know the answer to that. I just know it's going to carry on being tough, and we have to stand tough as an industry, I think, and somehow try and resist the temptation to dump and to keep lowering prices. And that comes to collectively from all of us, from top to bottom in the industry, from primary producers to co-ops to private producers to the smaller boutique guys probably don't have the as much play when it comes to discounting, but everybody's getting pushed from their buyers to drop their pricing. And whilst we have to be commercial and remain viable, remain in business, we must just try and manage it wisely.
Yeah, and I guess there's no getting around it. A lot of the South African export market is in bulk, and a lot of the market is dictated obviously by South Africa's bulk wine price impacts Australia, impacts Argentina and Chile. So there's that kind of vicious or virtual circle, I don't know, depending on how you look at it. Kalia, can I ask you, and obviously from the winemaking side, I mean, are you looking ahead to the 21 harvest and having to make those kind of forecasting decisions, or what's your kind of take on that?
Well, for Bosman, we have invested in extra capacity in terms of harvesting capacity. For the last few years, we've been doing custom crushes, making sure that in terms of a differentiated product, being fair trade or organic, that those wines were made in services cellars. But in this case, we have secured a space where we could differentiate on scale for ourselves. So I think it's almost still being very hopeful in the fact that the upswing must be there. It will come, and planning accordingly. But I mean, being here on the 10th of November, harvest definitely will be with us sooner than we think. It's almost now just making sure that we keep in close contact with those people who do give us the offset for our products. Greg, you're right. Forecasting is absolutely a horrendous game at the moment, but it's basically capitalizing on relationships and trying to keep the conversation as open as possible for as long as possible. Yes.
Okay, and I guess also going back to that outpouring of support there was, I suppose, during the lockdown, whether or not that can be sustained in the harsh realities of commercial buying, the next sort of 6-12 months with all the pressures that are going to be. I mean, Andrea, I mean, I know you're obviously operating more at the premium end of the market, but what's your take really in terms of how you see the price position for South Africa being maintained or even strengthened going forwards?
Well, just to put a twist on the idea of South African wines being value. I mean, I always say that South African wines are incredible value, but at every price point. So a 50-pound bottle of South African wine in the UK will knock the lights out of a 50-pound bottle of wine from a lot of other places of the world. So, regardless of the price point, it's always offering value because of the quality of wine coming out of South Africa as a whole. And this is all being done without government subsidies. A lot of other countries are subsidized when there are, harvest losses because of bad weather or just to help them build wineries themselves. In South Africa, most of it is unsubsidized. So our value is a real value that we're offering. The price that's being paid it's what the wine costs to make. And yeah, in terms of what South Africa can do, going forward along those lines, now is the time to focus. Now is the time to really highlight what South Africa does well. So when people pay, whether it's 5 or 20 or 100 pounds for a bottle of wine, they know that everything about that wine is authentic. And the USPs in South Africa, obviously there's a lot of varieties that do well in South Africa, but Chenin and Pinotage and Syrah really knock it out of the park. But then also, old vines. Corlia has, some of the biggest collection of old vines with Bosman in the country. And the Old Vines Project has been an amazing initiative to show the world how special old vines are and that they need to be preserved, and that does come at a cost as well. To have vines that are 40, 60, 100 years old, there is a value attached to that as well. So I think that's also an incredible initiative that really helps to highlight not just the quality of flavor and wine that you're getting, but where those wines are actually coming from and the history behind those vines, and the decades that have gone into making the product that someone is drinking.
Yeah, I mean, do you think this is a real, potentially like almost like a kind of crossroads moment for South Africa, from the point of view that, you know, there has been a lot of talk, and, you know, from what I can remember, about how South Africa does break away from this sort of value proposition, and really sort of almost put its foot down, as it were, about its premium price position. I mean, this is almost like the time where, you know, needs must. I mean, the conditions in the country are such that, you know, you just can't afford to go back to listening to supermarket demands and actually sort of sticking to its guns. Is it? I mean, do you want to pick up on that? Is that like a fair comment, Andrew?
No, I think so, that it's a point of no return in terms of, you know, people want to know that workers are being treated well. People want to know that the vineyards are sustainable. People want to know that the wine that they're drinking is authentic and has not been adulterated. And, you know, and that comes with the education that WoSA has been doing, Saves SA Wine, Old Vines Project, the new wave winemaking shows that have been happening in the UK. Those are all to highlight the incredible product that does come at a little bit of a higher price coming out of South Africa. But when people taste those wines, when those wines are on the palate and in the glass and strikes a conversation, it's absolutely worth it. You know, because we're not talking, you know, we're still have a lot of room to grow in terms of where prices could go. So even if prices are a little bit higher, you know that that's going to trickle down for the right reasons, for the quality, for the people, for the land in South Africa.
Yeah, well, actually, people can see the Q&As coming through. There's a lot of questions around that positioning for South Africa in terms of premium and mid-range. Actually, Lisa Harlow makes a good point about, you know, the opportunity in the mid-price range. I mean, Paul, do you want to pick up on the fact that what South Africa, in terms of future-proofing itself, you know, does it really need to start absolutely around price, and then, but also comment on how do you, as a producer, you know, safeguard your price position and push that forward?
Yeah. So I mean, I've been thinking about the question about future proofing, and it depends for every single business and where you are, what type of business model you're running. One of the first things I would say is you need to make sure that you are financially conservative. We are in a game that requires long-term investment. You're planting vines that you want to last for 30 years. That means if I'm planting a vineyard now, I'll be retired by the time that only becomes an old vine and part of the old vine project. So you need to take a long view, and part of that long view is then asking yourself, how am I going to be globally competitive in that business model? So if I'm going to do a low-cost wine, I need to ensure that I can take high yields, low production costs, and then I can sell it at 3, 4, 5 pounds a bottle. But I can tell you, if you're growing something in Elgin, that's not sustainable. And if you're doing that at that price point, you're going to start taking shortcuts at some point, and that's not what we want. So going back to what Andrea said is, if you want to ensure that you're looking after your people, you're looking after the environment, you're doing it right, then you need to build a sustainable business model, and making sure that you follow every single step of the way. Otherwise, what we're going to see happening is the low-end wines will eventually disappear because they are not sustainable. Those producers will be lost to citrus production in the Olifantsrivier, etc., etc. So I think at every single price point, you need a sustainable business model, and part of that sustainable business model is financial conservatism.
Yeah, and also I know you do a lot of work, don't you, around the sustainability and environmental work, and I guess that's all part of this story, isn't it, really, with South Africa? It's unique, obviously, supporting local communities and the whole fabric of South Africa in terms of it's linking the land, but it's also linking the land to the people and supporting both. I mean, I think those stories, in a way, it's time to really escalate that again. It's almost taking that to the next stage and highlighting just how unique South Africa is in that respect.
I think the industry as a whole has been conscious of that for quite some time. So the fact that South Africa's got the sustainability seal, and that's something that we strive for. Having said that, I think that's the minimum entry cost of doing business. Going forward, if you want to do business in a global environment, you need to be sustainable. You need to be environmentally conscious. You need to look after your people. And if you don't do those things, I don't think you should be doing business.
Brilliant. Greg, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I think it's correct. I mean, we do have a head start against our competitors. That seal we've got in the track and traceability that's been in place for years, we're ahead of the game. You know, our New Zealand and Aussie counterparts are very jealous of what we've got. I don't think we've taken it to the full extent and marketed as well as we could have. And I think we are certainly at the industry level, there's a lot of talk of that at the moment. So it is in progress. One of the other things that I think we, talk about raising these price boards and how do we do it. You look at research that's been done by Wine Intelligence, and I can't recall other ones, but I've seen a bit of it. If you look in Germany, Canada, US, the research shows that our consumers are all above 50 or 60 as a South African industry, which is not a great place to be in terms of building yourselves long term. And I think we've got to start looking at how do we create brands, or not create brands necessarily, but get our brands drunk by a younger demographic who will take our brands to the next level. I'm not saying the people above 50 or 60 don't want to spend money, but they're probably looking for bargains more than some of these younger consumers who are a bit more flash with their cash. And that's what we need to be trying to do to get our brands drunk. A buyer can help you a lot, but a buyer will argue with you that saying, well, I'm putting wines on shelf that according to consumer demand. And if I put a wine on the shelf for £9 and the consumer doesn't buy it, you need to do more to make that wine come off the shelf. How do you do that? And it's a chicken and egg thing. So we need to start spending more money talking to our consumers and engaging them. And that takes time. But I do see green shoots, and I think there has been very good progress over the past few years. And I think we're trending in the right direction. COVID's a total reset. We'll see how we emerge afterwards. But, putting my positive hat on, I'm still optimistic about the future of South African wine.
But yeah, I'm going to ask you, have you noticed a difference in terms of the demands and challenges that buyers are putting on you during this time? I know initially it's all about supply chain and making sure there's actual wine in the market. But are you picking up on a kind of a realization also from the buying community that something's got to give as well?
I get the nice questions.
Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah.
I'll put my political hats on. People know me now, I shoot straight. So I probably won't shoot as straight as I normally do. But I think yes and no. There's been some buyers that have been very supportive and understanding, some that are as non-negotiable as ever. And simply, I think one of the challenges we face, not just in the UK, but globally, is the high turnover of buyers. And every time buyers get to understand South Africa, learn its ins and outs, you start seeing more support. Once they've visited the market, they understand what we're about, how we need to, it's all well and good saying we want a fair trade wine, but it must be at £5. We're like, well, what's fair about that? There's nothing fair about that. Once they've been to South Africa and they understand the needs and issues we've got, they become a lot more supportive. So continuity, if there was more of that, would make our jobs a lot easier. The buyers that have been in their positions for a longer term are far more supportive. And for those of you listening, I think you know who you are, but there's some buyers that have been amazing to us and actually looking at helping us grow the category. But then the other side, you get some that are purely reporting to a financial organization that says, deliver revenue per square meter of shelf space. That's it.
Yeah. Paul, do you have a comment on that? I'll throw you under the bus as well.
You mean with regards to the buyers putting pressure on you?
Yeah, well, just whether or not, in terms of what kind of demands and challenges that you're seeing from buyers, and whether or not there's been any kind of flexibility or change or an adaptation to all the things that you've been talking about in terms of the position that South Africa's in.
Yeah, I think the reality is that everyone is under pressure, whether it's supermarkets, and in turn, whether the supermarket's under pressure, the buyer's under pressure, and they try to shift that pressure, which is understandable. So, a terrible position to be in is we've lost an incredible amount of business from airlines, which has been shocking, right? But the reality is the airlines aren't flying. So you need to adapt. And I think that the challenge then is going to be is where do you move that volume to? Now, the one area for us has been, it's been incredible. We've seen, especially in the US, has been how online sales for South African wines has moved, which has been fantastic. I mean, traditionally, going back, South Africa, I think, has not been that strong in the on consumption market. But that meant that the retail market, we had an opportunity to grow fast.
Brilliant. Andre, just switching tack a little bit. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning there about, you've been able to sort of talk to the world, as it were, through Zoom and host so many tastings and in a way, arguably get more feedback than you might do normally. But from your perspective, what kind of impression do you get from the market, from consumers, from buyers about what is really appealing about South Africa to people that you're talking to, and what you think South Africa can really turn the dial upon?
For me, I think where South Africa has definitely improved is, I always go back to the last recession in 2008, 2009. At that point in time, a lot of South African producers were doing the best that they could, but were using international references of the wine as their benchmarks, instead of saying, this is the most amazing Pinotage in South Africa. Pinotage is a bad example because there's not a lot of Pinotage outside, but instead of saying, this is the most amazing Cabernet in South Africa, they were saying, this is the best Cabernet outside of Bordeaux. But then it was always kind of second best. And so what I've been really excited with the direction that South Africa has been going in, at any price point, is that South African wines are so proudly South African now. They are really taking what South Africa does best, focusing on that, sort of starting to eliminate wineries that were doing a lot of things, are now focusing on what they do best, being proud that they're South African, showcasing what's happening here and the development that's happened. And I've seen this all happen in this last 10, 11 years. And I think that is what consumers, to answer your question, is what consumers really enjoy now, is it's not this comparison game that was happening for a long time, but is now, standing proud, and no one's being egotistical about it. They're just being proud of what we have and what we have to work with, and making it uniquely our own and uniquely South African. And I think that there's been then the consumer reaction is like, yes, it really is amazing. It's not second best. It's amazing South African wine.
Yeah, I must say that's definitely the big takeaway I take from my being fortunate to come to South Africa over the last 10, 12 years a few times. And when I first came out, it was very much, this is my Bordeaux blend, or this is my Burgundy blend. Whereas in the last time I came there, it was very much, this is my Syrah blend, or this is my, and it was, and the self-confidence, was, and I guess I suppose consumers want to buy confident brands, don't they? They want to buy into a brand that's confident about who they are, and the identity and authenticity, I suppose, is what. I mean, Khalil, I mean, you're from a winemaking point of view. I mean, I guess from what Andrew's just been saying in terms of how you're now looking at your wines and the kind of wines you're making, can we, in the time we've got left, perhaps look at that?
Yeah, so I think what we've heard is really the essence of it. I think for South Africa, we are quite diverse. I mean, our product ranges, what we're able to do, the climates that we grow our grapes in is very diverse. But I do think that the growers have come to the point where they know where the clarity lies. Almost as you asked me before, what is the elevator pitch? I think we're becoming more comfortable in what that elevator pitch is, and that it can be different, from one producer to the other, that there is enough differentiation and enough scope and enough opportunities for wines of a specific style, price point, and with those unique selling points, that there's a place for that, but owning the feeling and knowing why you're doing what you're doing. But yes, I think maybe just from my side, in this differentiated or in this beautiful environment where there is so much on offer, making sure or knowing what that thing is that you're giving to your customers is important. So that clarity, I think, is important. And then the other thing is maybe something that we haven't spoken about a lot is the fact that we're not in this alone, and that in terms of cooperation and collaboration, that there might be some things that we still need to do and still need to learn going forward. But I think in terms of the message and what people experience when they think about South Africa, maybe it's because people come here so often, the sunshine, the generosity, the people, the provenance, it's becoming clearer to people. And the picture of South African wine is definitely becoming quite distinct.
Yeah, and of course, obviously, the kind of initiatives that you're
Richard frozen.
I think Richard's frozen at the moment.
Greg, you'll have to take over.
We'll ask some questions in the meantime while we wait for Richard, if that's fine with everyone.
Yeah,
So
perfect.
I have a question from Frank Danker. The lifetime of the vineyards is quite short comparing to the rest of the world. How can you change this?
Seeing as I've known Frank for 20 years, maybe I can answer that. Hello, Frank. I don't really understand the question, Frank. I saw, but I think the plan, and Paul alluded to it, is planting vine now. You only start seeing benefits in 30 years. So that's a serious long-term forecast in any industry. I think, and back to the further to that is the differential between the premium vines and the wines in the big irrigated areas, Robertson or areas like that. So I think as long as we have a good mix and that we're able to be sustainable to plant the right vines that can compete with competing agro industries, so with citrus and with whatever other nuts and even flowers. So I don't really know how to answer the question more than that, Frank. I don't know if anybody else can.
Thanks, Greg. I have another question. Is it not better to support independent wine merchants rather than trying to get a national listing with a big chain?
Maybe I can answer on that. It is what it is. A big chain, for instance, in this case, for COVID, for Bosman, in terms of retail listings, really meant quite a lot for us. The fact that they had this fantastic distribution channel in which we were able to feed basically meant so much to us as a business. So I think having a varied approach, having a few options instead of just having a option is important. But I don't think we should ever forget that every one of these offset points, these agents, these people who sell our wines in the end is important.
Thanks. I have another question. New Wave South Africa was such a fantastic showcase on South African wine and quality. Do you think this needs to happen more, just not in the UK?
I'll answer that one. Look, I think that the idea of New Wave South Africa is that it's dynamic. It's always showing kind of what's happening, and there are such amazing classic brands in South Africa. But because it is a growing, dynamic wine producing country, that New Wave really just keeps it right on the tip of everyone's tongues, literally, of what's happening. So the classic brands will always be there and be the benchmark for what makes South African wine great. And New Wave keeps it exciting. And what's new? Everyone always wants to try something that's new. And this, last decade, as I mentioned, there's been an incredible new wave, a changing tide of producers and styles, and that kind of confidence in making truly South African wine. And I always kind of compare to sort of being part of that wave as being like, Hemingway and Fitzgerald sitting in a cafe in the 1920s in Paris, where just there's just so much energy and excitement. And if we only keep it amongst ourselves, people won't necessarily, feel that same vibe. But by doing new wave events, started in the UK, and it needs to go around the world, because that's when people also pick up on that energy and that vibe, that excitement. And when someone's making wine with, that extra love and that extra intention, you can taste it in the glass as well. So it's a great way to showcase it.
Thanks so much. I have another question from Anton Pretorius. Innovation was key to surviving the onslaught of COVID-19's impact on South African wine. What was the most significant or most interesting innovation in South African wine that stood out for you during this time?
So I can probably say within this actual South African wine sales, it has been incredible to see how many South African wineries jump to online sales and even pre-sales. I think in the last 9 months, the amount of wineries have developed direct-to-consumer business models has been absolutely incredible, and that's almost, I think, changed the industry. Kind of like if everyone asked how long would we have taken to do Zoom tastings all across the world without COVID, it would probably would have taken us another 5 to 10 years. And in that same model, I think we have shortened the time frame for South African wineries to do direct-to-consumer business models.
Hi all.
Hello, Richard.
Thanks,
Sorry, I dissipated into a black hole. My God, sorry, so stressed. I hope you had a nice chat without me. Oh,
we
dear,
did.
sorry.
We did. I hope you weren't talking on your own for a while there.
I asked a very good question as well, actually, unfortunately, but there you go. I'm aware of the time now.
Richard, it's fine. Our internet here, we don't have problems like in third world countries like in the UK.
Yeah, well, I know. I'm playing ones with council. So, Joe, are we? I guess we're nearly finished.
We're all good. We were just running through some of the questions that had come up on the Q&A. So it was all very smooth. We barely noticed that you disappeared.
Very good.
I was going to suggest, because I'm conscious that we've sort of come up to time, maybe just take one final question, and then we can wrap things up. And I know there's been quite a few questions about sustainability, so just to flag up that we are doing a whole webinar on sustainability on Thursday, where we're going to really sort of dig deep into that. So if you have the time, then do please join us. But shall we maybe do one last question, Carissa, and then finish up?
Yes, we can. We just have one question. Every country is producing Cabernet Sauv, Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc, and Chardonnay. How can South Africa compete with other countries on these varietals? Will it be a better strategy not to focus so much on these varietals?
Yeah, maybe I can, seeing as I sort of raised that white elephant and you answered. I think we need to produce what the world wants. There's no point in making bicycles if the world wants cars. And whilst there's always room for diversity, and we should all, have them in our portfolio, we all know, we can make a fantastic Roussan or a Viognier, but it's difficult to sell. Consumers want the big brands. And while Chenin and Pinotage do very well, and I think they should continue to be focused on particularly old vine examples, not just the cheap, entry-level stuff. The world wants more of those noble, classic, renowned varieties. And yes, it may change. I mean, as the problem is, we plant it now, by the time it gets to market, it's 8 years, 9 years time, if it's a cab minimum. And then it's not going to be a great cab because it's still a very, very young vine. So it is difficult to predict what will the world want in 10 years time. And maybe in 10 years time, people will want a Certico, or they'll want some, Grenache Noir that we can try and sell. But certainly for us in our long-term forecasting, I think those varieties are what the world wants. It's competitive, but if we can't compete, then why bother? I think our cabs and our Merlots are as good as anything that comes out of the world. And as Andrea said, we need to start making them properly. That's it.
I think just to add on to that, though, what's very important is people are fine tuning what varieties work well where in South Africa.
Yeah.
So for example, if someone wants to be a Sauvignon Blanc producer, they really shouldn't be making it in the Swartland. If someone wants to be making Sauvignon Blanc, they need to be in the areas more suited for it. And I think that's really where South Africa has growers in South Africa have become much more focused on growing the right things in the right places. And, and then they can look at the consumer as well. But if they are based in a hot, dry area, they shouldn't be making cool climate varieties and vice versa. So even though there are producers who do make for their customer, they're much better about growing in the most optimum area. So they're not just producing average wine, they're producing great wine for that customer.
And actually, Andrea, as you raise that point, again, just to flag up, so our webinar tomorrow is all about does site matter, and the fact that South Africa is really coming into its own in terms of understanding the terroir and what to plant and where. So we're going to have a whole other conversation about that happening tomorrow.
Can I just jump in? Just sort of, I know we're near the end, and I'm sorry for disappearing for a bit. From my point of view, just to perhaps finish off from what we were talking about before. Just a final question, really, to the panelists, to really sort of say, when you can travel again, which market or which wine region or which country are you most looking forward to being able to go to when you can travel again? I don't know who wants to jump in first there.
I'll travel anyway. Have passport, we'll travel.
Very good.
The question is it business or pleasure?
Yeah.
Those are different answers, right? But I would agree with Greg. I think, and Andrea mentioned it earlier on, where she said there's still no replacement for human contact. So I do think that if you can spend some time with your most important customers, that's first prize. So yeah, there's a lot of people to go and visit.
Yeah, Kalia?
No, I definitely also don't have a preference, but I do definitely look forward to the time that there will be opportunities to reconnect with, and this is like the wine business, isn't it? It's always people who love wine are usually in beautiful places surrounded by fantastic food and are just the best kind of people. So yes, absolutely missing that and looking forward to reconnecting again.
And finally, Andrew, you get a chance to meet some of the people in real life you've been talking to on Zoom. Where do you want to go to?
No, absolutely. No, as long as there's good food, good wine, and warm hugs, I'll be there. We love, as winemakers, marketing is part of every winemaker's job. You're taking a product from nature, putting love into it, putting time into it, raising it like your family, putting it in the bottle and sharing it with a customer, and having that interaction. It makes it so real. But if they also have a good wine collection that they want to share with us, I'm very happy to help them open some other bottles as well.
Well, without sounding too corny, I think the best place for doing all that is actually South Africa. So I'd love to come to South Africa when I can do. And perhaps next June, when the British Lions are out there, could be quite a good time to come out as well. But from my point of view, just to say thank you very much for the opportunity of hosting the session. Sorry I disappeared for a bit, and thank you for everybody for their contribution. So Joe or Siobhan, if you want to wrap it up now, or do you want to have a...
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, thank you everybody for joining us today. I think it's such a big topic and we've probably scraped the surface, but I think there's lots to think about, and we all, I know, remain very hopeful and positive about the future of South Africa. So huge thank you to Richard for chairing that for us. Thank you to our panel, to Andrea, Kalia, Greg and Paul. And a final thank you to Wesgrow for sponsoring this and working with us on it. And yeah, 2 more sessions, lots of other really interesting topics to cover. So come and join us for that. Thanks so much.
Cheers. Goodbye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.